What's up, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this session of the BackWoods, where we discuss the good, the bad, and the hilarious of our outdoor adventures. Joining me in the woods today is a primitive survival expert, Donny Dust from Mud, Sweat, and Beards. My name is Daniel Turnipseed, and you're listening to the BackWoods. All right, guys, I have Donny Dust joining me via video call. Just wanted to welcome you before we get too far into anything. Welcome to the podcast, and it's awesome to have you on.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you so very much. This should be a good time for sure.
All right, before we get into the good, the bad, and the hilarious, for the people who don't know who you are and your background information, would you be able to just give a brief summary of who is Donny Dust?
Yeah. So, long story short, my name is Donny Dust. I come from right outside of Boulder, Colorado. I do not claim Boulder, Colorado as my home. I was born in Detroit, Michigan, and kind of spent most of my life moving around from place to place. And, in all those different places, my parents kind of knew in order to keep me happy and kind of keep me sane was to park me next to some sort of national park or land with a bunch of acres. And the outdoors has always kind of been my home, my playground, where I could kind of grow and experiment with different kind of outdoor tasks, from fishing to hunting to living out there. And I've just kind of taken that interest as a small kid and turned it into kind of a profession and passion. Really all the way up until now. It's one of those things. It's kind of crazy. Just an individual with myself and some of my interests can have, a place in this modern world, if you will.
Off the top of your head, do you have like the list of what TV shows you've been involved with?
I've been involved in quite a few TV shows and film productions, but I was on Alone season 6. I was on a spin-off show of that called Alone the Beast, where I lived in a swamp for 30 days with no tools. I had my own show called Mud, Sweat, and Beards. I did a show with Cardi B called Cardi B Tries, where basically I brought her out into the woods, her and another guy named Afion, and showed them how to survive and purify water and eat turtle jerky. I was on another show called First Man Out with Ed Stafford. If you don't know who Ed Stafford is, he walked the entire length of South America. It took him like 2 years. So this was his kind of return back to South America. And then him and I raced through the Amazon jungle, jumping off a giant boat, swimming through the Amazon River, racing through the jungles to get to this extract point. And the first one out ultimately wins. That hasn't aired yet. That should be coming out in the States sometime soon. It's aired everywhere else, but and then currently right now I got a couple different TV show options kind of going on, a little bit more hunting specific, one that's a little bit more teaching survival skills, and then another one that is going back 5, 8, 10,000 years and kind of living like our early ancestors. So I guess it pays to be, a caveman in certain ways.
Yeah, definitely. And just being an expert in that primitive technology definitely helps. I did see that First Man Out ad, but I saw that it was saying 2023, so I haven't been able to see any previews of that. But all right, well, that being said, let's go ahead and get into the good. So what stories are the stories that you would classify as the best situations, the good situations, the stuff that keeps you doing what you're doing?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. The kind of good situations I come across in the outdoors. And I think, for me personally, I think any opportunity, every situation is a good situation, whether it's from, an opportunity to learn or an opportunity to see something new, whether it's a waterfall or a cave or a field full of wild edibles. All of those situations are pretty good. I really don't have a bad time when it comes to the outdoors, but a couple that stand out aren't necessarily just my own personal adventures, they're the adventures that I ultimately share with my two sons. I
Yeah.
have one son that's going to be 17 in the upcoming months, and one that just turned 14. And those adventures that we go on, and I've dragged them on some pretty amazing places and adventures. Those are the ones that are ultimately, the best, the good.
Hmm.
And there's one in particular that I personally enjoyed the best. They were probably, I think, maybe 6 and 7, and I dragged them through the Utah desert over about 26 miles in a matter of 2 days. They were carrying their own packs. We packed real minimal, and we just hit these canyons. And eventually, we found our way to the bottom of this one canyon, and there was this beautiful rock overhang and a spring dripping, and this stream full of trout and all this wild greens that we could eat. And it was kind of one of those points for me to share with them that, if you kind of rely on nature and you
Hmm.
understand the inner workings of the environment, it can provide for you in many ways. Because that's something I'd always kind of preach to them. If you kind of know more and carry less and understand that nature can provide all, um, your adventures can really be endless. So as we were, walking down in this canyon, the very bottom, we found this cave. We caught some fish. We boiled some water, made some tea, drank from the spring, and just kind of slept on this rock overhang floor, kind of looking up at the stars that you could kind of make out from the, between the canyon walls,
Hmm.
lit a fire, and we just kind of rejoiced in that moment. And I think another important reason why it was good is, my son's being young. A lot of folks think kids aren't capable at times, and sometimes that kind of slowly seeps into the minds of kids that they're not capable, as we try to protect them and safeguard them and all these things as parents do. But I think for my two boys, they realize that they can. And if I could pull up photos of the cliffs they walked down and the rock walls they had to kind of shimmy across and the terrain overall that they walked through, I think for those two boys, they realize they can. And I think
Yeah.
in that experience, it was pretty amazing to kind of see the joy on their faces as we camped in this canyon the next day. We woke up, hydrated and ready to rock and roll, and walked out of the canyon and eventually walked our way to a pizza parlor where they had, a couple Cokes and a large pepperoni pizza. So that sort of stuff, anything with my two boys in the bush, definitely a good moment. It's a life changing and kind of one of those ones that will always kind of sit in your brain as, man, you remember when we did this? And they still bring it up to this day, still to this day. Like even when they have a rough day at school or something like that, one of them will always chime in, well, it's not the 27 miles we did in Utah. So remember that. Remember how hard that was? Ah, yeah, that puts everything kind of in perspective for them,
Yeah.
because they can always go back to that hardship, that time, and really draw from it and learn from it.
Well, and that just makes me think of my kids as well, because they're young. Obviously, I'm young. But they are 2, 3, and then I have a newborn as well.
Oh,
But
right.
even my 3-year-old, he's always asking, like, can I go catch a snake? Because that's what I love doing, catching snakes, catching lizards. And so I'm like,
Yeah.
the day that he's old enough that I could actually make those memories with him and allow him to handle animals that he wants to because he sees his daddy doing it, that'll be
Yeah.
a pretty cool day. So that's pretty awesome that, first off, your number one memory, your good memory, is with your kids. And I'm sure they
Oh,
appreciate that a lot.
yeah, for sure. I think you're on the cusp of that. You know what I mean? Right where you get to start bringing your kids into the outdoors, aside from like carrying them on a backpack and going for a hike, like you actually get to, teach them how to think, not necessarily what to think. You get to impart bits of wisdom that you've come across. And, if I could remember every nitnoid detail of that one hike that we did, it could probably be a book. I could write it down as the 27 miles of goodness. But I think, you know, as kids mature and as schedules become busy and jobs and after school sports and homework, when they're at that young age, even like your kids moving up into that 8, 9, 10, that's the time where you can really kind of, impart some wisdom and kind of spark that curiosity and really kind of let them flourish.
All right. Now, on the topic of good, if out of all your survival experiences, what is the number one place that you've been to that's like Absolute, you would go there again. You love doing survival situations in that area.
Yeah, man, that's a good question. So, what place would I absolutely love to return to again and again? I think I'm a big fan of deserts. I've traveled to the Amazon and through Europe and all through Southeast Asia, all throughout the U.S. But there's something about a desert that makes it real. So kind of understand that when people go out and they practice survival or they do survival, there is an aspect of kind of like self-control. They have the ability to say, I'm going out for 10 days. I'm going to bring these items to kind of enable my stay out there. Well, at a certain point, it becomes camping, right? It becomes I'm going out there with the necessary requirements to kind of ultimately camp out and kind of test some skills. I think for me, it is the elimination of all that stuff and truly testing yourself when you're in those remote regions. And I find one of the best places to test yourself is in a desert because it is harsh, but it is full of life. It is so resource rich. And I'm talking high deserts, low deserts, the Chihuahua, the Sonoran, the Mojave, all these different deserts that exist throughout the US. They offer so much in flora and fauna. The reptiles out there are absolutely amazing. And I think when you take what you envision as the extreme, yes, we know it can be hot. There can be areas of no shade and very little water. And you put yourself in those situations to really kind of, test yourself. You really see how capable you are. And I think from those capabilities, when you learn, you kind of say to yourself, man, this is a rough place. This is really difficult. There's not a lot of water here, but I know how to find it. And I think those extreme situations really generate a very positive and a good kind of memory where it's like, I want to go back there and test myself again. I want to go back there and instead of bringing a knife, I want to bring no knife and I only want to use, the tools that I can make from the land. Those sort of things really create that kind of nostalgia, that longing to return because it is the ultimate test.
On that same type of question, not in a survival situation, but just traveling. If you could travel to one place in the world, whether you've been there or not, where would that be?
Oh man. Um, I would like to probably return back to Scotland. That's where a lot of my family's from. Aunts and cousins and second cousins, and I was there once when I was about 10 years old. And when you're 10 years old, you can only take in so much information and kind of really kind of think about where you're at. But hindsight's 2020, and I think as an adult, I'd like to return back there and kind of walk in some of the family towns where we come from and kind of see some of the history that pertains to kind of my history and who I am and where I come from. And I like to bring my sons there and see some of our old family homes and some of the places that my great grandmother and grandfathers experienced and saw. And I think that would be a pretty amazing place.
All right, and then last question before we move on to the bad situations. In terms of the TV shows and television series that you've been on, what is the best experience and which show was it on?
I think I think really my best experience TV show wise was I really enjoyed my time in the Amazon. It had been a place I'd always wanted to go and kind of experience the people, the culture, the variety of flora that exists there. And I was fortunate enough to go, and it's a land of mystery, and I feel like I just barely scratched the surface. It's one of those places that you can walk into the jungle, build a bow, use the bark from that tree that you built the bow from, and shoot some sort of game, process that game, make a fire, build a shelter, and like really just truly live in one of those environments that's, I don't want to say that's not known, but it's not like going to like the eastern woodland or Canada or one of those places. It's one of those environments that it's just full of mystery, and there's so many resources there. And it's definitely one that I think TV show wise, when I was down there shooting First Man Out, it was like, I want more. I want to stay here for like the next year and really get to know, the people, and really dive into what kind of exists and how I can go about using it.
All right. Well, now I guess it's time to transition into the bad. And that being said, I really don't want to like focus on like surviving is so bad because obviously you would completely disagree with that. Um, but what are the some of the scary situations and like injury threatening situations that you've been in?
Yeah. So a little bit of background to me is I enjoy rock climbing. I enjoy rock climbing with my sons, and several years ago, I was climbing with my two sons, and there was a group that was climbing next to us, and the group that was climbing next to us. You could kind of tell through their mannerisms and how they were approaching different things. They were very novice. They were very new, and it was a younger guy and two gals. And as I was climbing with my sons, I found myself starting to kind of speak in a way that maybe those other folks were possibly listening, where they would kind of listen to some of my advice. And, they were kind of there, so on and so forth. But long story short, the group, they had to do their first climb. And when you climb to the very top, you build an anchor and then you kind of get lowered down, and then other people can kind of go up and down. So this guy was starting his climb, and I was I was nervous, and I was kind of worried watching, like, if this guy falls in front of my kids, in front of these two gals, we're gonna have, there's gonna be a serious issue. There's first aid, a lot of things could take place. So as he was climbing, I got myself onto the rope, and I kind of mirrored his climb. And we were about maybe, I don't know, 8 to 10 yards apart, left and right. And I made my way up to the top a little bit quicker, and I built an anchor, and I just kind of locked myself into that position, just kind of waited for him to get to the top. And as he got to the top, he kind of just, I don't know if he kind of lost everything that he might have known, or just kind of bit off more than he could chew. But he got to the top, and he's 60, 70 feet up, and his legs start shaking, his hands start shaking. He's holding onto a very small piece of stone, trying to build an anchor that he can lock himself into. And just by kind of looking at him on the right, I could see he literally had no idea what he was doing. And it was kind of that time to step in. I had kind of let things go to a certain point where I'm like, if this guy falls, it's going to be a really bad situation. More importantly, the gal below who was belaying him, she wasn't the most confident in her ability. So the entire scenario was very scary for everyone. So I locked myself off and kind of traversed over to where he was, kind of put my arm around him. I secured him to the bolts and the anchors where he was, and we built an anchor, and we, ultimately lowered him down. But before lowering him down, I kind of gave him a bit of like fatherly advice. I'm like, if you don't know what you're doing, it's okay. Like, I would think that if you're getting ready to climb up 60 feet of rock and potentially lower yourself down with very new people, sometimes we got to put our egos, we got to put our bravado kind of aside and think about the safety in this situation. So I'm going to help you down. I built your anchor. She's going to lower you down. But when we're done, you guys need to leave. You need to go spend some time in the climbing gym, looking at some videos, reading some books, or get a guide to help you out, because that scenario it took my focus of that joy of spending it with my two sons and really redirected it to that individual who was climbing up the rock. And it kind of shook me from that point on, where it was kind of like, man, there's people out there that are more focused on saying, this is what I think I can do, and not necessarily having the skills to kind of do it. So when it came to that situation, like, my entire day was like, all right, boys, I think it's time for us to, go get some lunch, because I mean, that could have been the result of that, that guy's death. And I think in my mind, if I wasn't there and I hadn't spent most of my life, involved in the outdoors and rock climbing, there could have been something in a newspaper where, a climber tragically falls, 60, 70 feet to his death. And, I was there 10 minutes before. So that is, for me, a very, bad situation. But I think it's also important for people to not be, oh, look at this guy, he's trying to show off. If you see something that's wrong, you should intervene, especially when it comes to the outdoors, because it is, you're isolated, you're not close to civilization. Even you could be 30 minutes out, but someone falls and they snap their spine or have a major neck injury. 30 minutes could be, a significant amount of time to get them to safety.
It sounds like he was teachable. correct?
He
He
was,
actually
yeah,
he took the correction. Um,
yeah. I
but
think
that
that scare got him, you know,
mhm,
like when he
yeah.
got to the top, holy cow, I don't know really. I think I know what I'm doing, and maybe he's done it static in his garage or something. But once he got up there, it was
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and I am personally terrified of heights. So it was probably just the moment of looking back and realizing exactly how high he was. Uh,
yeah,
okay, so on the topic of the bad, you've been on plenty of TV shows, and I know there is stuff that happens behind the scenes, but I know the people who are watching because of you are more going to be interested in the one situation, and I think you know what I'm talking about, on Alone,
yeah.
where I actually had somebody negatively comment towards you because of the fact that you had to tap out, clearly not knowing the background information.
Oh,
And I thought that was kind of rude, so I let him know what happened. Um, but for those of you who don't know, I'm sure you can explain it. Be,
yeah,
Not discussing the prior incident yet, what exactly happened on Alone that led to you ultimately tapping out?
yeah. So the reality is on a TV show like that, you are alone, and you are kind of self-sustaining and independent. So it kind of unfolded in a couple different ways. So when prior to doing all of the actual footage where you're out there alone, you're learning cameras and you're learning about the flora and the fauna in that place. And I had been on the ground at our little boot camp and was eating some of the berries and eating a variety of things out there to kind of get my body exposed to it. And over time, I started to kind of have a little bit of GI issue. I had some Imodium in my bag, took it, and thought nothing of it. The day of launch, kind of had that same kind of GI kind of issue, and I was like, well, it's probably nerves. You're excited. It's all these different things. It's going to be an issue. And once I got out there, there was nothing wrong. Like everything was perfectly normal. Spent the first couple days kind of building a shelter, not really hunting or doing anything like that, because my goal was to ultimately build my home, and then the rest of the time it was just hunting. And in the interim, while I was building my home, again I kind of returned back to the berries and a lot of different things, and was just kind of foraging from the land freshly. Once I completed, my shelter and whatnot, it was time to start hunting. I went out and I started hunting, and while that was kind of going on, some of those GI issues slowly kind of resurface a little bit. And the one piece of advice that I didn't really kind of adhere to is that on Alone, you are there to film everything. And I was filming everything, but like when I would run to the bathroom and like go to the bathroom off the side of camera, I wasn't filming that. And so there was a couple of those little emergency bathroom issues throughout the day, and I wasn't catching those on film. So I went through this process, hadn't really eaten anything but berries, and that was pretty much it. Then eventually I shot this muskrat, cleaned the muskrat, inspected it as I do with all game, and ate it that night. And kind of once I introduced a new food source into my system, I always call it food shock. My body kind of went into food shock. Anybody who's spent a long time out in the bush, um, you get hungry, your stomach kind of shrinks, and all of a sudden, when you introduce a lot of food to it, sometimes you get nauseous and sick. For me, I attributed that muskrat to kind of that food shock where, man, I can't keep all this down because I hadn't eaten anything. And, ultimately I got sick. Come to find out, I actually had a form of dysentery that I had caught while eating a lot of the berries now, and drinking some of the water that, a lot of animals defecate and urinate on, across the natural land. I consumed something that had been contaminated, and the dysentery was kind of laying in wait, if you will, until I actually had some stuff in my body that I could expel through, north and south, if you will. And that was a huge complication. However, I'd been sick in the bush many times before, and I know there's certain plants that if I can source, it's going to help with some internal GI issues. And one plant in particular was yarrow. And right around, I think it was like day 7, maybe the evening of day 6 into day 7, I just kind of continuously look for this plant because I knew if I could find it, I can make a tea out of it, and it was definitely going to give me some relief and really help my body out. And I couldn't find it, and it got to the point where I was not able to really keep any kind of liquids or anything inside my body. I would consume some water, make Labrador tea, anything that I consumed, it was just coming out. And as a person of, critical thinking, I kind of equated, all right, if I cannot hold water down, I cannot find the medicines and stuff that I need, and my body's starting to really kind of go downhill, not from a form of starvation, but from a form of not being able to stay properly hydrated. This could really expire in a negative way. So long story short, I had a tap and, get pulled out, and that's the way it is. I mean, I don't think it's anything really overwhelmingly negative. Sure, I would like to have continued the show and competed on it, but that's a reality, and that's where a lot of the people you see on social media and various things is, if you take their cameras when they're out there filming a YouTube video and you spin it around, there could be their truck, there could be all the resources they need right behind them, and that's not my kind of approach to things. So somebody could go out there, they could be sick. I think that's a great opportunity to learn, how can I make myself better? I couldn't find the resources there to make me better, and I had to tap. I mean, it's for me, it's not the end of the world. I don't dwell on the fact that, oh, you went out alone and you had a tap. Well, I don't know how many seasons there's been, but let's say there's been 10. There's only been 10 winners, and there's been 90 people that have tapped. I mean, that's the name of the game. But still had a good time. I mean, it is what it is. Some people are like, "Oh, you're the guy that tapped on all." I'm like, "Yeah, I am." Still had a good time. I don't know what you want me to say. Life is long, and I just keep doing it.
Well, and that's what makes me kind of chuckle, because there are people that would love to go on the show, not to win, but just to experience being on the show, because it's such a cool thing to do, despite whether you tap out or not. Just getting to go out and try to survive as long as you can in the situation they put you in. A lot of people would love to do that. But that being said, floating around the internet is a statement saying that you had a heart attack the year prior. Is that true?
I did, yes. Prior to that, 1 year prior, I had a heart attack at the age of 37. And when I went out alone, I was 38. And it was a LAD heart attack, which is like my left anterior descending artery into my heart, completely ruptured. And they call it the Widowmaker heart attack. And most of the people that have it, typically, they die. Fortunately for me, I was, in good health. I was young. I don't, participated in smoking and a lot of drinking and just, bad foods. So I was healthy, which was likely one of those things to save me. And one of the things prior to going out alone, like my heart was definitely a concern, but one of the things at that time, being so fresh from a heart attack, so to speak, was I had to take these medications that would really kind of help my heart in certain situations. And through the vomiting and kind of losing all my liquids, I wasn't able to retain any of those meds. So it took a situation that any other given day prior to a heart attack, I probably would have said, you need to tough this out. You'll figure it out. But once I realized I couldn't keep the meds inside my body that was going to keep my heart going, it was kind of a no-brainer for me. So I was like, well, between not being hydrated and not being able to take those meds, you're really putting yourself at risk. And you have, kids at home. Put your ego aside again and think about, others, and tap out. I mean, it was a difficult decision to make, but it was also an easy decision. But having a heart attack wasn't a deterrent to go. It was just something I needed to consider. And it's something I still consider in all my travels, and all the things that I do is, maintaining a certain level of heart health and making sure that, the things that I put into my body are enabling me to go longer and go farther, not going to ultimately debilitate me.
Yeah, and that's one thing I said to the guy that was being a little bit more negative. And he, from the looks of it, he's military Marine, and I know you're a Marine veteran as well.
Yeah.
But so I'm assuming he's got a little bit of a macho man complex. But my grandfather was a Marine, and so I understand. But I did inform him about the previous year heart attack, and I essentially told him he would rather go home to his kids alive than die in the woods alone. And he liked my comment. He didn't respond, but he liked my comment. So
no, like as a 43-year-old grown man, like, words don't hurt me. what somebody could say is like, that's fine. People are entitled to their opinions, and I'd be like, hey, that stone tool you built is really dumb. I'm like, that's fine, man. I'm still enjoying my life. If you seek out a form of negativity to critique someone, by all means, that's your choice. Doesn't mean it's going to impact me in a way that's I'm like going to cry myself to sleep on a pillow at night, you know?
Yeah. And what amazes me is a lot of people, even in situations like this, yeah, you tapped out, but you did more than 99% of the population possibly could have out there. In a survival situation, most people wouldn't even be able to do it. And so there's always some, and you can't survive in every situation. There's situations where you absolutely have to tap out, and there's situations like health-wise where you have to tap out. And it just so happens that your health was a little bit more at stake than the other contestants. But you still went out there. You still did your best, and you came home alive, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, I think it's worked out in my personal advantage. I mean, I've been on a bunch of different shows, written a couple different books, and get the opportunity to do great podcasts. And for a guy who was on the show for 8 days, I guess the 8 days really made an impression on folks. And people are curious and want more. So that's kind of what I do now is provide those skills through the school that I run and through the books that I write and the interactions with folks that I have. I live by saying life is long. If I sat and dwelled on that one moment in time, I'd be consumed by that for the rest of my life. But, eating the berries, that was the choice I made. Shooting a muskrat, that was a choice I made. And it's nobody else's fault. It's nobody else's anything. Those are my choices. And I still eat muskrat today. So it's not a big deal,
All right. Well, enough of the bad stories. Let's get into the funny stories before we close this out. What are
Yeah.
some absolutely hilarious moments you've had that even today you think back on and it makes you laugh?
Gosh, I mean, there's been some funny ones. So we'll do like a TV one. So I think a TV one was there's a pop star named Cardi B, and I was able to bring her out into the woods and kind of teach her various things on how to survive and purify water and all this sort of stuff. And I think it was the funny stuff that was occurring was her reaction to a lot of the things that I would just do daily,
Yeah.
finding clean water and finding and having a method of purifying it. For her, it was the reactions that she had that, I mean, yes, they're filming it, but they had to probably cut me out so many times because I would just die laugh. It was so out of her wheelhouse, so out of her normal that she's over here and I'm way over here, and she was all the way over onto my side drinking dirty water through sand through a sock, and like just the expressions and it was funny across the board because I mean I bring people out into the woods all the time and kind of show them skills, and sometimes it's they've heard of it or they're familiar or any number of things. But for her, she is such on the far spectrum that her responses to everything were it was comical to the point where I couldn't even really stomach, without laughing continuously at her. So, yeah, that was definitely funny. And I think, one time, I was in this cave in Colorado that I frequent, and I kind of told this story before, but, I was in this cave and this, it was night. And sometimes at night I don't sleep with a fire. There's no need if it's kind of warm out. And then, you got to feed a fire all night long. It kind of comes taxing on the body and the mind. So I had an initial fire. I kind of let it go out, and I'm sleeping in this cave, and I'm sleeping in this giant grass pile in this cave, and I'm wrapped up in this blanket. And then the next thing you know, I start to feel something lick my toes, and I'm like, huh, that's kind of different. When like you can feel something, but you're not really like 100% awake,
Yeah.
right? So I kind of slowly kind of come to, I kind of move my feet, and I could feel that tongue still licking it. And as I kind of come to, there's a bear. There's like a juvenile black
Oh.
bear that's kind of licked my toes because sometimes I'm barefoot and they probably get, smelly with the berries and things that I've walked across. And I let out like a scream, like a blood curdling scream, enough where this bear instantly got scared and kind of took off out the entrance of this cave. And then from that point on, I lit the biggest fire. I sat up all night looking at this cave entrance, waiting to see some glowing eyes from the crackling fire, and just sat there all night. And when I think back about it, most people probably would have left. They would have said, you know what? There's a bear in the area. It just licked my toes. I should probably leave. For me, when I'm like, God, sometimes you're not the brightest, but I'm like, you know what? This is your cave. You built this great bed. You built this great fire. You should just stay in here the rest of the time. And I did.
Oh
But when I think
gosh.
about it, I'm like, I could have turned out a lot of different ways because black bears can be notorious at times
Yeah.
for, attacking folks. But fortunately, it was definitely a juvenile and just curious what was on the bottom of my feet.
Okay, and I notice besides the black bear incident, you do have a lot of hides behind you. Do you
Yeah.
have any absolutely hilarious hunting stories?
Oh man, hunting stories. Nothing that's like I don't think hilarious. Like hunting for me is kind of a more of it's a means of taking food and resources and honoring the hunt. So even if something was to transpire that was funny, it's there's nothing that really sticks out in my head. I will say there's been time I've been cleaning game with my sons, and they kind of go a little deep on the gut, and they kind of get that poof
Oh yeah.
of that stomach, that's kind of been bloating a little bit, and they kind of get that waft of intestines and just everything else, and they just kind of gag, and that gives me a good chuckle, that sort of thing. But
My cousin, he used to whenever we would go elk hunting, he would wait till the guts would swell, and then he would take a sharp stick and pop it while we were trying to gut the elk, and it would just
yeah,
spray in our faces.
yeah, I mean that stuff is I mean, seeing my boys do it is kind of funny. I mean, I have all the best times with them, and then the funny times are with them. I mean, I've seen them. We've been, out in the back country for a couple days, and we're walking in, and like, for me, that so in their minds, sometimes they're like, all right, are we really done, or are we going to do this other trail? Because they kind of sometimes I'll get distracted, and we'll be like, all right, we're on our way home, and I'll be like, but look at that cliff, we should go check that out. So sometimes for them, they kind of prepare, like, all right, are we really going home, or are we really just going to another spot he hasn't told us? So this one time, um, we were walking out of the mountains, and there's this big stream we had to cross. And when I cross the stream, I just kind of cross the stream. I'm in sandals or something like that. And my kids were under the suspicion that this wasn't our final day. It was, but they always kind of, again, think, are we doing more? So they sit down on the opposite bank and completely take off their shoes. I think they had probably like shorts on. They like pulled their shorts up. They were like backpacks hanging above their head. It looked like they were in like a rice paddy in Vietnam with a rifle, just trying to cross it. And as I cross it, I'm thinking to myself, all right, yeah, they definitely know what to do. But I'm like, that current's kind of strong. But they'll be okay. They're fine. And as I cross, I make it to the other side. My youngest one steps his foot in, and the oldest one, he kind of steps in foot after them. And I could see them as they got all their clothes and their stuff, and they're walking like this. They slowly make their way across, and my oldest one just barely catches like this rock and kind of goes over. And as he goes over, grabs his brother. They both submerge into the water. They both pop up completely soaking wet. And then they just grab their stuff and just shoot across the
Yeah.
river. They're like, we are going home. Has to be like the last stop, because they were in their minds thinking, all right. And then they figured out ultimately that if they're completely soaking wet, all right, yeah, we'll go
Yeah.
home. We'll go find a way to dry out, and we'll go grab
Yep.
another pizza or something like that. But yeah, I have some funny moments with them. It's pretty comical.
Yeah, I'm notorious for my clumsiness around streams. I think I have 3 or 4 times where I have completely head over heels plunged into the water just because either I'm not wearing the proper shoes or I'm not paying attention. At one time, I was standing on too small of a log above the river and it snapped and I fell straight in the river. But the thing that always cracks me up is I always have all of my camera equipment. I have microphones, I have cameras, I have all of that. And so every
Yeah.
time I do it, my mind instantly goes towards, I don't care about filming anymore. Is all my stuff okay? And sometimes it happens right when we get there, and sometimes it happens on the way out. So sometimes I have to spend the whole day recording, 9 hours soaked.
That's the name of the game when it comes to stream cross. I mean, I've fallen into more streams, and at a certain point, it's like, all right, I know I'm going to get wet, and it's like, what do I not need to or want for it to get wet? And that's like the one thing I'll like safeguard and hold above my head like this as I'm trying to walk across. But yeah, it happens. And anyone that says it hasn't happened is not telling
Mhm.
the truth.
All right. Well, that being said, before we cut an end to this podcast, is there anything for the viewers, especially the more primitive survival viewers that are watching, um, in any situation where you're going out, what is one primitive survival tool that is a necessity to learn how to make or have on hand when you go out?
Yeah, I think when it comes to primitive survival tools, I think if that is kind of your genre or the path you like to walk, I really think there should be more focus and understanding and dedication to learning flint knapping, because the ability to shape stone in any number of tools, from knives, blades, arrow points, fish hooks, drills. If you understand how to do that, you can ultimately create a tool set that will enable you really to stay in any environment for long term. And a lot of people become very gear dependent. I work with folks in a variety of shows, and if they don't have that knife, or they don't have that axe, they don't have that thing, they're really incapable. And I think for me, um, I stress to many people, try to learn how to make, even something as, simple as this, which is kind of like a spear point, but it could be used in a lot of different ways to cut notches in fireboards and shape wood and craft this and open game. Um, that is the essential skill that people should learn. More importantly, I call it the first skill. If we travel way back in the time when we were really fully humans at that point, we were still utilizing chunks of stone and the sharp edges that they have, um, to open up game and smash bones and pull out the marrow. That ability to shape stone is truly our first survival skill, even before fire. Like, we were scavenging animal kill sites and using the stone that we would just simply break to cut away pieces of flesh and kind of go on from there. If you are interested in earth skills, primitive skills, natural skills, whatever terminology you want to use, you have to learn how to flint knap. That is like the number one thing. There's many environments I have personally walked in where there is no stone, and I would give anything for a chunk of chert or flint or obsidian. There's other places that I've walked in and there's stone everywhere, and I'm like, this is perfect. I've got everything I need in the stone. Even fire, you can make fire from stone. So I think if people really want to learn that first skill, they should really focus on understanding how to shape stone through lithics, through flint knapping, and their world will open up as far as the confidence they'll have and the capabilities that they'll have when they're out in the bush.
Yeah. And I noticed this section or this bench you're sitting on. Are those all your napping tools?
Yeah, I've got, just tons of, various billets. I've got, giant bifaces that I'm working on to shape into various tools, and spear points of various shapes and designs. I mean, for me, it is always stone. Don't get me wrong. I like a
Mhm.
steel blade, but there's also some folks, they have questions like, we always think you like to use stone, and you're like, yeah, I do enjoy using stone. Um, Even though in a video or a post or just in general, I might be using a steel blade. I'm like, but me being able to use a steel blade is not my only sort of resource. It gives
Yeah.
me the opportunity to say, all right, I'm going to do something a little bit quicker because I have a steel blade. But if I was to lose that steel blade, I know how to go to that next level and say, how do I create that next blade, that next chopper thing that can
Yeah.
slice? And my time on the show Alone the Beast, that was the perfect example of, there's no modern tools, and we were able to create fire through a hand drill and smoke wild hog meat. I built atlatls, and it all came down to locating a couple shells, like freshwater
Mhm.
clams, and a couple shells that some raccoons had eaten and kind of cached. Was able to take those shells and use those shells essentially as a knife. And then once I was able to get into the hog, I could use those shells to shape the hog bones into various tools, and atlatl
Mhm.
dart points where I made an atlatl and
Mhm.
killed a possum with it and ate that possum. And then,
Yeah.
but it's the simple tooling. It's the simple cutting, chopping, and slicing tools. Now, in a swamp, how are you going to chop down a tree with a clamshell? Well, you don't. You build a fire at the base of that tree. Let's say the tree is 8-9 inches across. You build a fire at the base of the tree. You wrap the upper trunk full of clay and mud, build a fire at the bottom, and you burn the tree over. It's about that kind of problem
Yeah.
solving. But the shells in that case gave me the ability to create the fire, to cut the notch, to shape the wood, ultimately burn poles over and build a bigger and better shelter.
All right. Well, that's something I definitely would like to look into at least. And you said you've written books. Are one of those on napping?
So I just completed my third book, and there's some napping in there. The first two books, first one's called Scavenger, and that kind of highlights, my heart attack and some of my approach to the outdoors. And then the second one is called Earth Roamer, and that is kind of my methodologies, my best practices, the things that I kind of do mixed with some survival skills. Kind of captured in that book, how I go about kind of breaking gear selections down and what's the best way to build shelters, not necessarily knowing that when I'm in a snowy environment, this is the shelter I need to build, but factoring in a couple different key components to why you would build a shelter in a certain way. So Earth Roamer is a little bit more survival. My third book is completely survival, stone tools. It's for the person that's looking to get out into the bush and really kind of learn and experience the outdoors. That will be the book. And it's in the editing phase right now. It's at the editor. So it's not quite published, but hopefully this year it should be published and ready to rock and roll.
Are all of these on your website?
Yes. If you go to DonnyDust.com, there's, if you scroll down, you can see various things I've been involved in. And then there's some links to purchase some of the books.
Okay, and I will probably link those in the description as well, so people can go and purchase those if they want to.
Awesome.
Well, I think I'm going to call that good for this podcast, just because we are going a little long, happily going a little long, but I think we're like 5 minutes over. So, all right, well, thank you for coming on. It was a pleasure to hear some of your stories, and
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me, and best of luck out there in the future. And thanks again so very much.
All right, guys, that's it for this session with Donny Dust, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. Make sure you guys are subscribed to this channel and like this video, and I will see you guys on the next podcast.